It was supposed to be the party of the year. My best friend Ethan had just turned 21, and we were all excited to celebrate in style. We'd been planning this bash for months, pooling our money to rent out this massive cabin in the woods near Lake Tahoe. It was October, and the fall colors were in full swing, painting the landscape in vibrant reds and golds. There were about 15 of us who made the trip up from San Francisco. We'd all pitched in for food, drinks, and decorations. The cabin was perfect, 3 stories tall with huge windows overlooking the lake, a massive stone fireplace, and enough beds for everyone. It even had a hot tub on the back deck. We arrived on Friday afternoon, and the party was set to last all weekend. At first, everything was great. We cranked up the music, started grilling burgers, and the drinks were flowing freely. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the water, we gathered around a bonfire in the backyard. Someone brought out a guitar, and we all sang along to cheesy pop songs, laughing at how off-key we sounded. It wasn't until later that night that things started to feel off. I was in the kitchen grabbing another beer when I noticed movement outside the window. Just a flash of something darting between the trees. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but it was too dark to make anything out. I shrugged it off, figuring it was probably just a deer or something. As the night wore on, more people started to notice weird things. Emily swore she saw someone standing at the edge of the woods, just watching us. But when we all went to look, there was no one there. Mark's phone went missing, only to turn up in the mailbox at the end of the driveway an hour later. We all laughed it off as drunken pranks, but there was an undercurrent of unease that was hard to shake. Around midnight, Ethan suggested we play hide and seek in the dark. It seemed like a fun idea at the time. We were all pretty drunk by that point. We turned off all the lights in the house and spread out to hide. I found a good spot in a closet on the second floor and settled in to wait. That's when things really started to go wrong. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my hiding spot, but they didn't sound like any of my friends. They were too slow, too deliberate, and they kept stopping right outside the closet door. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever it was could hear it. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on. When I finally worked up the courage to peek out of the closet, the hallway was empty. But something caught my eye. A muddy footprint on the carpet that was way too big to belong to anyone in our group. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized we might not be alone in this house. I ran downstairs to find the others, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was the cabin owners checking up on us, or some local kids trying to scare us. But deep down, I knew it was something worse. I found most of the group gathered in the living room, all looking pale and shaken. Turns out everyone had experienced something strange while hiding. Liz had been in the basement when all the lights suddenly turned on, revealing dozens of old photographs taped to the walls, all of them showing our group at various points throughout the day. She swore they hadn't been there earlier. Ethan had been hiding in the attic when he heard someone whispering his name over and over again. But when he turned around, there was no one there. And Jessica. Jessica was missing. We split up into groups to search the house and the surrounding woods, calling Jessica's name. The once fun party atmosphere had turned tense and fearful. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every creaking floorboard made us jump. I was with Emily and Mark searching the area behind the cabin. We had just reached the edge of the woods when we heard a scream coming from inside the house. We sprinted back, our hearts racing. We burst through the back door to find absolute chaos. Jessica had reappeared, but she was hysterical, babbling about someone grabbing her and dragging her into a hidden room behind the pantry. Ethan was trying to calm her down while the others searched the kitchen, but there was no sign of any hidden room. That's when the power went out. In the sudden darkness, panic set in. People were shouting, stumbling around, trying to find their phones for light. I fumbled for my own phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn on the flashlight. The beam of light swept across the room, illuminating terrified faces. And then, for just a split second, it caught something else. A figure standing in the corner, tall and unnaturally still. But when I swung the light back, it was gone. Someone managed to find some candles, and we all huddled together in the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Theories flew back and forth. Everything from an elaborate prank to a group hallucination from tainted alcohol. But deep down, we all knew this was something far more sinister. We decided to make a break for our cars and get the hell out of there. But when we got outside, we found all the tires had been slashed. We were trapped. The next few hours were a blur of terror. We barricaded ourselves in the living room, pushing furniture against the doors and windows. Strange noises echoed through the house. Scratching sounds from inside the walls, heavy footsteps on the roof. And worst of all, what sounded like our own voices calling out from the woods, begging for help. As dawn broke, we were all exhausted, jumpy, and on the verge of breaking down. That's when we heard the sound of a car coming up the driveway. We rushed to the windows, hope and fear warring in our hearts. It was the police. Apparently the cabin's security system had been triggered and they'd come to investigate. We poured out of the house all talking at once, trying to explain what had happened. The officers looked skeptical as they searched the property. They found no evidence of intruders, no hidden room in the pantry, no photographs in the basement. Even the slashed tires turned out to be intact. We had been so panicked, we hadn't actually checked them ourselves. In the cold light of day, our story seemed ridiculous. The police clearly thought we were just a bunch of drunk kids who had scared ourselves with ghost stories. They lectured us about the dangers of mixing alcohol and paranoia, then left us to clean up and head home. As we packed up our things, an uneasy silence fell over the group. No one wanted to admit how terrified they'd been, or try to explain the inexplicable things we'd all experienced. It was easier to pretend it had all been a misunderstanding, a shared delusion brought on by too much booze and an unfamiliar environment. But as we drove back to San Francisco, I couldn't shake the memory of that figure I'd seen in the darkness, and I noticed how everyone kept checking their rearview mirrors, as if expecting to see something following us. We tried to laugh it off in the days that followed. Ethan even joked about making it an annual tradition, the Halloween Cabin of Terror. But none of us ever went back there. And whenever the subject came up, there was always an undercurrent of tension, a shared look that acknowledged the unspoken truth. Something had happened that night, something we couldn't explain and didn't want to face. I still have nightmares sometimes about being trapped in that closet, listening to those slow, deliberate footsteps. In my dreams, the door always opens, revealing. But I always wake up before I see what's on the other side. Maybe that's for the best. It's been a few years now, and we've all moved on with our lives. But every October, I get a text from Ethan on his birthday. It's always the same. Just the address of that cabin and a question mark. And every year I leave it unanswered. Some parties are better left in the past. I never thought a costume party could go so horribly wrong. It was supposed to be a fun night out in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. My college friends and I had been planning this trip for months, saving up every spare penny to rent a cool Airbnb in the French Quarter for a week of festivities. There were 6 of us: me, my roommate Alex, our friends Mia and Zoe, and a couple we knew from our dorm, Ryan and Ava. We'd arrived in the Big Easy 2 days before Fat Tuesday, eager to soak up the atmosphere and party like we'd never partied before. Our first couple of days were amazing. We explored the city, stuffed ourselves with beignets and gumbo, and danced in the streets to the sound of jazz bands. The energy was electric, with everyone in high spirits as the biggest celebration of the year approached. On the night before Mardi Gras, we decided to attend this exclusive costume party we'd heard about through the grapevine. It was being held in an old mansion on the outskirts of the city, supposedly owned by some reclusive millionaire who threw this legendary bash once a year. We spent hours getting ready, perfecting our costumes. I went as a steampunk airship captain, complete with a brass telescope and a top hat with gears glued to it. Alex was a zombie football player, Mia dressed as Cleopatra, Zoe as a cyberpunk hacker, and Ryan and Ava went as Bonnie and Clyde. The mansion was about a 30-minute drive from our Airbnb. As we approached, I could see why this party had such a reputation. The place was massive, all Gothic architecture and wrought iron fences. Colorful lights pulsed from every window, and we could hear the thump of bass even before we got out of our Uber. At the gate, a guy dressed as the Grim Reaper checked our names against a list on his tablet. He nodded and waved us through, handing each of us a masquerade mask. He told us it was required for entry and had to be worn at all times inside the house. The masks were beautiful, handcrafted leather things with intricate designs. Mine was dark brown with brass accents that matched my costume perfectly. As we walked up the long driveway, I noticed how isolated the place was. The neighboring properties were barely visible through the thick trees surrounding the estate. It felt like we were entering another world. The party inside was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Every room was packed with people in the most incredible costumes imaginable. There were acrobats performing on silks hanging from the ceiling, fire breathers in the courtyard, and a DJ booth set up in what must have been the ballroom, pumping out a mix of EDM and New Orleans jazz. We hit the dance floor hard, swept up in the incredible atmosphere. The masks added an air of mystery to everything. It was impossible to tell who anyone was, which made every interaction feel thrilling and slightly dangerous. After a couple of hours of dancing and several drinks from the open bar, I needed a breather. I told Alex I was going to explore the house a bit and headed off on my own. The place was a maze of rooms, each one decorated in a different theme. There was a jungle room with actual vines growing up the walls, an Arctic room where fake snow fell from the ceiling, and a space-themed room with glowing stars on the walls and people floating around in zero-gravity harnesses. I was admiring a room that seemed to be entirely underwater, complete with bubbles rising from the floor and holographic fish swimming through the air, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see someone in an elaborate Venetian plague doctor costume, their mask a long beaked thing that was honestly pretty creepy. They gestured for me to follow them, then turned and walked away without a word. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed the plague doctor through several more rooms, each one getting progressively quieter and less crowded. Finally, we arrived at a small library. The plague doctor ushered me inside, then closed the door behind us. The music from the party was now just a distant thump. The room was dimly lit by a few candles, casting long shadows across the bookshelves. The plague doctor removed their mask, revealing a woman probably in her 50s, with striking gray eyes and silver hair. She introduced herself as the hostess of the party and the owner of the mansion. She told me she'd been watching me and my friends all night, and that she had chosen me for a special honor. I felt a mix of excitement and unease as she explained that every year she selected one guest to participate in a secret ritual. She said it was an ancient tradition that would bring good fortune and success to the chosen one. All I had to do was follow her instructions exactly. Looking back, I should have been more suspicious. But the combination of alcohol, the surreal atmosphere of the party, and the general Mardi Gras spirit of abandoning inhibitions clouded my judgment. I agreed to participate. The hostess smiled and handed me a small box. Inside was a silver key on a long chain. She told me to wear it around my neck and not to take it off under any circumstances. Then she gave me a series of instructions. At exactly midnight, I was to go to the top floor of the mansion and find a red door. The key would unlock it. Inside, I would find further instructions. She made me swear not to tell anyone else about our conversation or the ritual. Then she put her mask back on and led me out of the library. As soon as we stepped back into the main party, she disappeared into the crowd. I rejoined my friends, the key a cold weight against my chest under my costume. They asked where I'd been, and I made up a story about getting lost in the house. As midnight approached, I started to feel increasingly anxious. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing and just enjoy the party. But another part was intensely curious about what would happen. At 11:55, I made an excuse about needing the bathroom and slipped away from my friends. I climbed the stairs to the top floor, my heart pounding with each step. The music faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. The top floor was dark, lit only by a few flickering candles in wall sconces. I walked down the hallway, checking each door. Finally, at the very end, I found a door painted a deep blood red. My hands were shaking as I took the key from around my neck and inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the door swung open with a creak. I stepped inside, not sure what to expect. The room was circular, with a domed ceiling painted with astrological symbols. In the center was a stone pedestal, on top of which sat an old leather-bound book and a silver dagger. I approached the pedestal, my footsteps echoing in the silent room. The book was open to a page covered in strange symbols I didn't recognize. Next to it was a note in elegant handwriting. It instructed me to prick my finger with the dagger and let 3 drops of blood fall onto the open page of the book while reciting a phrase written at the bottom of the note. I picked up the dagger, its weight surprising me. The blade gleamed in the candlelight. I pressed the tip to my index finger, hesitating. This whole thing was starting to feel less like a party game and more like something seriously weird. But I'd come this far, and some irrational part of me was afraid of what might happen if I didn't complete the ritual. So I took a deep breath and pushed the dagger into my fingertip. A bead of blood welled up. I held my hand over the book and let 3 drops fall onto the page. Then I recited the phrase from the note. It was in a language I didn't recognize, maybe Latin or Greek. As soon as the last syllable left my lips, the candles in the room flared brightly, then went out, plunging me into total darkness. I heard a sound like rushing wind, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my arm. I jerked back, my heart racing. More touches came from all directions. Like I was surrounded by invisible presences. I could hear whispers now. Too faint to make out words, but definitely there. Panic set in. I turned and ran for the door, but in the darkness, I couldn't find it. I stumbled around the room, my hands outstretched, desperately searching for the exit. The whispers grew louder, and the touches became more insistent, tugging at my clothes and hair. Just as I was about to scream, the door burst open. Light flooded in, momentarily blinding me. I felt hands grab me and pull me out of the room. When my vision cleared, I saw it was Alex and Mia. They looked terrified. They told me they'd gotten worried when I didn't come back and had started searching the house for me. They'd heard me moving around and talking to myself in this room. But when they tried the door, it was locked. It had taken both of them pushing against it to finally break it open. I tried to explain about the hostess and the ritual, but when we looked back into the room, it was completely empty. No pedestal, no book, no dagger. Just a bare, dusty attic space. We went back downstairs to find the others. The party was still in full swing, but it no longer felt fun or exciting. It felt menacing. We decided to leave immediately. As we were waiting for our Uber outside, I saw the woman who had claimed to be the hostess. She was standing at an upstairs window, watching us. But when I pointed her out to my friends, they couldn't see anyone. The ride back to our Airbnb was silent. No one knew quite what to say. I kept checking my finger for the cut from the dagger, but there was no mark at all. We spent the rest of our trip trying to enjoy Mardi Gras, but the incident at the mansion cast a shadow over everything. We did some research and found out that the property had been abandoned for years. The last known owner had died in the 1980s, and it had been tied up in legal disputes ever since. I never told anyone else about what happened in that room. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? But sometimes late at night I still hear those whispers. And sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of shadowy figures that vanish when I turn to look at them directly. I don't know what exactly happened that night or what kind of ritual I participated in, but I do know that I brought something back with me from that mansion, something that's still with me, watching and waiting. And I have a feeling that someday it's going to collect whatever price I unwittingly agreed to pay. My experience was supposed to be the highlight of my summer. 3 days of non-stop music, dancing, and hanging out with friends in the California desert. The Rhythm Oasis Festival had been hyped up for months as the next big thing in the festival scene, promising an incredible lineup and a unique, immersive experience. My best friend Tara and I had been planning this trip since tickets went on sale. We'd convinced our other friends, Marcus and Jen, to join us, making it a proper road trip from our hometown of Portland. The 4 of us packed up Marcus's old van and hit the road, singing along to our favorite songs and daydreaming about the amazing time we were going to have. The festival was being held at a massive remote property about 2 hours east of Los Angeles. As we drove deeper into the desert, the anticipation built. We could see other cars full of excited festival goers, all of us converging on this one spot in the middle of nowhere. When we finally arrived, the scene was incredible. A temporary city had sprung up in the desert, with colorful tents and structures as far as the eye could see. The main stage was a massive, futuristic-looking contraption that seemed to rise organically from the desert floor. Smaller stages and art installations were scattered throughout the grounds, each one more eye-catching than the last. We set up our tent in the designated camping area, chatting with our neighbors and sharing the excitement of the weekend to come. The energy was electric. You could feel the buzz of anticipation in the air. As the sun began to set, the festival truly came to life. Lights flickered on across the grounds, transforming the desert into a psychedelic wonderland. The music started, and soon the air was filled with a mix of thumping bass lines and cheering crowds. We danced our way through the first night, bouncing from stage to stage and marveling at the incredible production value of each performance. Everything felt magical, like we'd stepped into another world where only music and joy existed. It wasn't until the second day that things started to feel off. I woke up with a pounding headache, my mouth dry from the desert heat and probably a bit too much partying the night before. I crawled out of the tent, squinting in the bright sunlight, and realized that Tara wasn't in her sleeping bag. I figured she'd probably just gotten up early to grab breakfast or use the restroom, so I didn't think much of it at first. But as the morning wore on and there was still no sign of her, I started to worry. I asked Marcus and Jen if they'd seen her, but they were as clueless as I was. We split up to search the campgrounds, thinking maybe she'd made some new friends and crashed at their tent. Hours passed, and there was still no trace of Tara. The worry had now blossomed into full-blown panic. We went to the festival's information booth to report her missing, but the staff seemed weirdly dismissive. They told us it was common for people to wander off at festivals and that she'd probably turn up eventually. They took down her description but didn't seem particularly concerned. As the day progressed and the music started up again, I found it impossible to enjoy myself. How could I dance and have fun when my best friend was missing? Marcus and Jen tried to keep my spirits up, suggesting that maybe Tara had just gotten really into the festival spirit and lost track of time. But I knew her better than that. She wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. We spent the rest of the day searching, showing her picture to everyone we met, but no one had seen her. As night fell, the festival's energy shifted. What had seemed magical and exciting the night before now felt ominous and overwhelming. The pulsing lights and thunderous music that had been so thrilling now just added to my sense of disorientation and fear. It was around midnight when things took an even darker turn. We were near the outskirts of the festival grounds, calling Tara's name, when we heard a scream. It was distant and quickly drowned out by the music, but I was sure I'd heard it. Marcus and Jen heard it too. We ran towards the sound, pushing our way through the crowds. We ended up at a small, out-of-the-way stage that was set up to look like an old-fashioned circus tent. The sign outside advertised it as the Freak Show stage, promising unique and shocking performances. As we approached, a group of people came running out, looking pale and shaken. We asked them what was wrong, and one girl, her voice trembling, said that the performance inside wasn't an act. She said they were really hurting people in there. My blood ran cold. Without thinking, I pushed past them and into the tent, Marcus and Jen right behind me. The inside was dimly lit and hazy with smoke. On the small stage, I could make out several figures, but it was hard to see clearly. There was a large object center stage covered with a velvet cloth. As our eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with horror that the figures on stage were wearing masks that looked like distorted animal faces. They were gathered around the covered object, making strange, rhythmic movements. Suddenly, one of them grabbed the cloth and pulled it away. I felt my heart stop. Lying on a table was a person, strapped down and clearly terrified. And although it was hard to make out features in the low light, I was almost certain it was Tara. I screamed her name and started to run towards the stage, but before I could reach her, strong hands grabbed me from behind. I turned to see two large men in festival security uniforms, but something about them seemed off. Their eyes were too wide, their grips too tight. They started dragging me towards the back of the tent. I could hear Marcus and Jen shouting, sounds of a scuffle. I kicked and struggled, but their grip was like iron. As they pulled me through a flap in the back of the tent, I caught one last glimpse of the stage. The masked figures had turned towards us, and even through the masks, I could feel their eyes fixed on me. It was a look of hunger, of anticipation. The next few hours were a blur of terror and confusion. I was taken to a small, bare room that looked like it was part of the festival's backstage area. The men who'd grabbed me tied me to a chair and left me there, alone in the dark. I don't know how long I sat there, my mind racing with horrible scenarios of what might be happening to Tara, to Marcus, and Jen. I pulled at my restraints until my wrists were raw, but they wouldn't budge. Eventually, the door opened. A figure entered, tall, wearing an elaborate mask that covered their entire head. It looked like a combination of a bull and some kind of demon. They stood there silently for a long moment, just staring at me. Then they spoke, their voice distorted by the mask. They started talking about the festival, about how it was more than just music and art. They said it was a celebration of primal instincts, of the darkness that lives inside all of us. That some people came here to lose themselves, to embrace that darkness, and others were here to be sacrificed to it. I felt sick as I realized what they were implying. This wasn't just some random act of violence or kidnapping. This was organized, planned. And it had been happening right under everyone's noses, disguised as just another weird performance art piece at a festival known for pushing boundaries. The masked figure told me that I had a choice. I could join them, become part of their family, help them with their work. Or I could be the next sacrifice. They said they'd give me some time to think it over, then left the room. I don't know how long I sat there in the darkness, my mind reeling. I thought about Tara, about what might have already happened to her, about Marcus and Jen, and whether they'd managed to escape, or if they were in rooms just like this one. About all the other missing person reports that must have been dismissed as just another partier who wandered off. Just when I thought I couldn't take the silence and darkness anymore, I heard a commotion outside. There were shouts, the sound of running feet. Then suddenly the door burst open and I was blinded by flashlight beams. It was the police. Apparently Marcus and Jen had managed to escape and had run to find help. They'd found a group of actual festival security guards who had no idea what was going on in that tent. When they investigated, they discovered the whole horrifying operation. The next few hours were a whirlwind of police statements, medical checkups, and tearful reunions. Tara was found, alive but traumatized. She'd been drugged and was barely conscious, but the doctor said she would recover physically. It turned out that this group had been operating at festivals across the country for years. They preyed on the atmosphere of freedom and boundary pushing that these events fostered, using it as a cover for their twisted games. The freak show stage had been their way of hiding in plain sight, passing off real torture as extreme performance art. In the days that followed, as the full scope of what had happened came to light, I struggled to process it all. The festival organizers claimed they had no idea that they'd been deceived just like everyone else. But it was hard to believe that no one had noticed anything suspicious over the course of 3 days. We gave our statements to the police and tried to help with the investigation as much as we could, but mostly we just wanted to go home. The drive back to Portland was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. It's been a few months now, and I'm still trying to come to terms with what happened. Tara is in therapy, working through her trauma. Marcus and Jen seem to be coping better, but I know they have nightmares too. As for me, I can't listen to electronic music anymore without feeling a surge of panic. The thought of going to any kind of festival or large event fills me with dread. I keep thinking about what the masked figure said, about the darkness inside people. I wonder how many others in that crowd might have known what was happening, might have even been there for that very reason. It all started when my college roommate, Jess, invited me to her cousin's 21st birthday bash in Chicago. I'd never been to the Windy City before, so I figured why not make a weekend of it. We took the Amtrak from our small college town in Indiana, arriving in Chicago on a crisp Friday afternoon in October. The energy of the city was electric, a far cry from our sleepy campus. Jess's cousin, Mia, lived in a trendy loft in the West Loop, and that's where the party was set to go down. When we got to the loft, I was immediately impressed. The space was huge, with exposed brick walls, massive windows overlooking the city skyline, and a rooftop deck that was perfect for partying. Mia greeted us warmly, introducing us to a few early arrivals who were helping with decorations. As the sun began to set, more people started to show up. The loft quickly filled with a mix of Mia's college friends, co-workers, and family members. The music was pumping, drinks were flowing, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. I mingled with the crowd, sipping on a vodka cranberry and taking in the scene. That's when I first noticed him, a tall guy with dark hair and intense eyes, standing alone in a corner. He seemed out of place somehow, older than most of the crowd and not really engaging with anyone. When he caught me looking, he smiled, but something about it made me uneasy. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing instead on the party. Jess and I hit the dance floor, laughing as we attempted to keep up with the more coordinated dancers around us. As the night wore on, the party got wilder. Someone started a drinking game in the kitchen, and soon half the party was crowded around, cheering and taking shots. It was during one of these games that things started to get weird. I was standing on the outskirts of the group, watching when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find the intense-eyed guy standing there. Up close, he was even more unsettling. He introduced himself as Marcus and asked if I was enjoying the party. We made small talk for a few minutes, but something felt off. His questions were just a little too personal, his gaze a little too focused. When he offered to get me another drink, I politely declined and made an excuse to find Jess. As I moved through the crowd, I noticed a few other people I didn't recognize. They all seemed to have the same intense look as Marcus, and they were spread out around the loft, watching the partygoers. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they were all wearing the same type of watch, a bulky, high-tech-looking thing that seemed out of place with their otherwise casual attire. I found Jess in the bathroom, touching up her makeup. When I told her about the strange people I'd noticed, she laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. She reminded me that it was a big party, and there were bound to be people we didn't know. But as we rejoined the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The party continued to rage on, but I found myself constantly on edge, watching the strangers out of the corner of my eye. They never seemed to drink or dance, just observe and occasionally speak into their watches. Around midnight, Mia announced it was time for the birthday cake. Everyone gathered in the main room, singing and cheering as she blew out the candles. As the cake was being cut, I noticed Marcus and the other strangers converging near the front door. They were talking in low voices, occasionally glancing at the oblivious partygoers. That's when I saw it. As Marcus shifted his position, I caught a glimpse of something metal tucked into his waistband. My blood ran cold as I realized it was a gun. I tried to catch Jess's eye, to signal her that something was wrong, but she was busy helping serve cake. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I try to warn everyone? Call the police? But before I could decide, Marcus stepped forward and clapped his hands loudly. The music cut off abruptly, and everyone turned to look at him. In a calm, authoritative voice, He announced that this was now a hostage situation. His associates moved quickly, producing zip ties and starting to restrain the shocked partygoers. Panic erupted. People screamed and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The strangers were blocking all the exits. I saw one of them grab Mia as she tried to make a break for the fire escape. In the chaos, I managed to slip away unnoticed. My heart pounding, I ducked into a small utility closet off the kitchen. Through the slats in the door, I could see the main room where most of the party guests were being herded into a corner, hands bound behind their backs. Marcus's voice cut through the noise, demanding silence. He explained that they weren't there to hurt anyone. They just needed to use the loft for a few hours to complete a job. If everyone cooperated, he promised they'd all be free to go by morning. From my hiding spot, I watched in horror as the situation unfolded. The hostage-takers moved efficiently, securing the loft and confiscating everyone's phones. They set up some kind of equipment on the rooftop deck, satellite dishes and computers that looked like something out of a spy movie. Hours crawled by. I remained hidden in the closet, afraid to move or make a sound. My legs cramped from being crouched in the small space. And I was desperately thirsty, but I didn't dare reveal myself. Through snippets of conversation I overheard, I started to piece together what was happening. These people were some kind of high-tech thieves, using the loft's location and height to intercept data from a nearby corporate headquarters. The party had just been convenient cover for them to access the building without suspicion. As dawn approached, there was a flurry of activity. I heard Marcus tell someone over a radio that the job was done. They started packing up their equipment and preparing to leave. Just as I thought it might all be over, disaster struck. One of the partygoers, a drunk guy I vaguely remembered seeing earlier, had managed to work his zip ties loose. In a misguided attempt at heroism, he rushed at Marcus, trying to grab his gun. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space of the loft. The would-be hero crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. People screamed and cried as Marcus stood over the fallen man, his face a mask of cold fury. The atmosphere in the loft changed instantly. The hostage-takers, who had been almost casual before, were now on high alert, fingers on triggers. Marcus barked orders at his team, telling them to move up the timetable. They started herding people towards the freight elevator, presumably to move them somewhere else before making their escape. In the commotion, I saw my chance. The kitchen was momentarily unguarded, and the window there led to the fire escape. My hands shaking, I eased out of the closet and crept towards the window. I could hear Marcus in the other room, angrily talking to someone on his radio. Just as I reached the window, I heard footsteps coming towards the kitchen. I froze, my hand on the window latch. The footsteps stopped, then started again, this time moving away. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and quickly opened the window. The cold morning air hit me like a slap as I climbed onto the fire escape. I could see police cars in the street below, lights flashing. Somehow, despite the hostage-takers' precautions, the authorities had been alerted. I half climbed, half fell down the fire escape, my legs weak from hours of inaction. As soon as my feet hit the pavement, I ran towards the police, waving my arms and shouting. The next few hours were a blur. I was whisked away to a safe location, questioned by what felt like dozens of officers, and finally reunited with a tearful Jess. She had been among the hostages moved to the building's basement, and was unharmed but badly shaken. We learned later that the police had managed to storm the loft and apprehend most of the hostage-takers. Marcus, however, had somehow slipped away in the chaos. The injured partygoer was taken to the hospital and was expected to recover. In the days that followed, the story was all over the news. It turned out the thieves had been after proprietary trading algorithms from a major financial firm. If they had succeeded, they could have made millions in the stock market before anyone realized what had happened. I gave statements to the police and the FBI, recounting everything I had seen and heard from my hiding place. They told me that my information was crucial in understanding the full scope of the crime. The aftermath of the party was hard to process. Jess and I both struggled with anxiety and nightmares. The carefree college life we'd known seemed like a distant memory. Every party invitation now carried a hint of potential danger. But as time passed, we slowly started to heal. We attended counseling sessions, leaning on each other and our friends for support. Mia, feeling guilty about what had happened at her party, became a close friend, and we helped each other work through the trauma. Looking back now, it all seems surreal, like something out of a movie. But the memory of those terrifying hours in the closet, the sound of that gunshot, the fear in everyone's eyes, those will stay with me forever. I still go to parties sometimes, but I'm always aware of my surroundings, always planning an escape route. I know the odds of something like that happening again are slim, but the experience taught me that you can never be too careful. Life can change in an instant, and danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, even at a simple birthday party. One day, my best friend Alex invited me to celebrate finishing high school at his uncle's beach house in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The plan was for a group of us to drive down from Charlotte for a week of sun, sand, and celebration before we all headed off to different colleges. There were 6 of us making the trip. Me, Alex, his girlfriend Tanya, our friends Marcus and Leah's cousin Zach, who was visiting from California. We packed up Alex's old minivan with enough snacks, drinks, and beach gear to last us a month, let alone a week. The excitement was palpable as we hit the road, singing along to our favorite songs and daydreaming about the epic party to come. The beach house was everything Alex had promised and more. It was a massive 3-story place right on the beach, with a private pool, a hot tub, and a deck that looked out over the ocean. Alex's uncle was some big-shot real estate developer, and it showed in every luxurious detail of the house. We spent the first couple of days living it up, lounging on the beach, swimming in the ocean, and exploring the town. On the 3rd night, it was time for the big graduation bash. Alex had invited a bunch of locals he knew from spending summers here, and word had spread. By nightfall, the house was packed with people. Music was blasting, and the drinks were flowing freely. I was having a great time, dancing with a cute local girl I'd just met, when I noticed something odd. There was a group of guys I didn't recognize standing in a tight circle near the sliding glass doors that led to the deck. They were older than most of the crowd, probably in their late 20s, and they kept glancing around nervously. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a big party, and I figured they were probably friends of friends. But as the night wore on, I kept noticing them. They never seemed to dance or mingle, just huddled together, talking in low voices. Around midnight, I decided to get some air and headed out to the deck. As I was leaning on the railing, enjoying the cool ocean breeze, I overheard a snippet of conversation from the other side of the deck. I recognized the voices as belonging to 2 of the guys from the nervous group. They were arguing about something called a drop-off, and one of them mentioned a boat. It sounded like they were planning some kind of deal, and they were worried about cops. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these guys might be drug dealers using our party as cover for a transaction. I tried to casually make my way back inside to find Alex and warn him. But as I turned, I came face to face with one of the guys. He was tall and muscular, with a buzz cut and cold eyes. He asked what I was doing out here, his tone making it clear it wasn't a friendly question. I mumbled something about getting some fresh air and tried to move past him, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron as he marched me back into the house and towards the stairs. I tried to catch someone's eye, to signal for help, but everyone was too caught up in the party to notice. The guy led me to one of the upstairs bedrooms where the rest of his group was waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear as they started questioning me. They wanted to know what I'd overheard, who I'd told, and if I was working for someone. I tried to play dumb, insisting I hadn't heard anything and didn't know what they were talking about. But they didn't believe me. One of them, a wiry guy with tattoos covering his arms, suggested they should take me with them to make sure I didn't talk. Just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard a commotion from downstairs. Someone was shouting about the cops being on their way. The party had gotten too loud and a neighbor had called in a noise complaint. The guys panicked. They started arguing about what to do with me. The buzz-cut guy wanted to take me as insurance, but another one said I'd slow them down. In the chaos, I saw my chance. While they were distracted, I made a break for the door. I ran down the stairs, pushing through the crowd of partiers who were now frantically trying to leave before the police arrived. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me and a shout for me to stop. But there was no way I was stopping. I burst out of the front door and ran down the beach, the cool sand under my bare feet and the sound of the waves almost drowning out the pounding of my heart. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. After what felt like miles, I finally slowed down and looked back. There was no sign of anyone following me. I collapsed onto the sand, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. As my panic subsided, I realized I had no idea where I was. The beach all looked the same in the darkness, and I'd left my phone back at the house. I started walking, hoping to find a street or a house where I could ask for help. It felt like hours before I finally saw lights in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a 24-hour beach bar. I must have looked a mess, barefoot, out of breath, and probably pale as a ghost. The bartender took one look at me and asked if I was okay. I managed to convince him to let me use the phone. With shaking hands, I dialed Alex's number, praying he would pick up. When I heard his voice, I nearly cried with relief. He had been worried sick, driving up and down the beach looking for me. Alex came to pick me up, and on the drive back to the beach house, I told him everything that had happened. He was horrified, apologizing over and over for inviting those guys to the party. Apparently they were friends of friends, and he had no idea they were into anything illegal. When we got back to the house, it was swarming with police. The noise complaint had turned into a full-scale drug bust. The guys who had grabbed me were nowhere to be seen. They must have managed to slip away in the chaos. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and questions. I told them everything I had overheard and what had happened upstairs. They took it all very seriously, especially when they found a duffel bag full of drugs hidden in the pool house. The rest of our vacation was pretty much ruined. We spent most of it dealing with the police and Alex's furious uncle, who had no idea what had been going on at his beach house. Our parents were called, and let's just say they were less than thrilled. In the end, we decided to cut our trip short and head back to Charlotte. The drive home was subdued, to say the least. We were all processing what had happened and how close we'd come to real danger. The aftermath of the party was harder than I expected. I had nightmares about being chased down the beach, and loud noises would make me jump. Alex felt guilty for putting us all in that situation, and it took a while for things to feel normal between us again. The police eventually caught most of the guys involved in the drug deal. It turned out they were part of a larger operation using vacation rentals as distribution points. I had to testify at their trial, which was nerve-wracking, but also gave me some closure. Looking back on that night, I still can't believe how quickly things spiraled out of control. What was supposed to be a fun graduation celebration turned into a terrifying ordeal that could have ended much worse. I still enjoy parties and having fun with friends, but I do it with open eyes now, because I know firsthand that sometimes the real danger at a party isn't drinking too much or doing something embarrassing. It's the unexpected threats that can be lurking just below the surface of the celebration. It was supposed to be the party of the year. My roommate Danny had been planning her 30th birthday bash for months. She'd rented out this trendy underground club in downtown Portland, Oregon called The Labyrinth. It was known for its maze-like layout with multiple rooms, each featuring different music and themes. The place was always packed on weekends, but Danny had managed to book it for a private event on a Thursday night. I'd helped Danny with some of the planning, so I arrived early to help set up. The club was even cooler than I'd imagined. The main entrance led to a central hub with 5 different pathways, each twisting off into its own series of rooms. There were black lights everywhere, and the walls were covered in trippy, glow-in-the-dark murals. As we were setting up the decorations and sound systems, I noticed something odd. There were these little symbols painted near the doorways of each room. They were subtle, barely noticeable, unless you were looking for them. When I asked one of the club staff about it, he just shrugged and said they'd always been there, probably some artist's signature or something. People started arriving around 9 p.m., and soon the place was buzzing with energy. Danny had invited what felt like half of Portland. There were at least 200 people packed into the club. Each room had its own vibe going. There was a techno room with pulsing lights, a chill room with low sofas and ambient music, a rock room with a live band, and more. I was having a great time, bouncing between rooms and catching up with friends I hadn't seen in ages. The drinks were flowing, the music was pumping, and everyone seemed to be having a blast. It wasn't until a few hours in that I started noticing something was off. At first, it was just little things. I kept running into people who looked disoriented, like they couldn't figure out where they were or how to get back to their friends. I figured they were just drunk or overwhelmed by the club's layout. But then I started overhearing snippets of weird conversations. People were talking about rooms I hadn't seen, about music that wasn't playing anywhere in the club. I decided to do a full circuit of the place, just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. That's when things got really strange. As I was walking down one of the twisting corridors, I suddenly realized I didn't recognize where I was. The music had faded away, and the black light murals on the walls seemed different, more sinister somehow. I tried to backtrack, but nothing looked familiar. The corridors seemed to be shifting, leading me in circles. I started to panic, my heart racing as I realized I was completely lost. How was this possible? The club was big, sure, but not this big. As I turned another corner, I almost ran straight into someone. It was a guy I vaguely recognized from the party, looking as freaked out as I felt. He started rambling about how he'd been wandering for hours, how the rooms kept changing, how he couldn't find the exit. I tried to calm him down, suggesting we team up to find our way out, but he just shook his head and ran off down another corridor. I kept walking, trying to stay calm and logical. I focused on the little symbols near the doorways, thinking maybe they were some kind of navigation system. But the more I looked at them, the less sense they made. They seemed to be changing, evolving every time I blinked. The deeper I went, the weirder things got. I started encountering rooms that definitely hadn't been there before. There was a room filled with old, ticking clocks, their hands all spinning at impossible speeds. Another room was completely mirrored, reflecting infinite versions of myself stretching off into the distance. I don't know how long I wandered through this nightmare version of the club. Time seemed to lose all meaning. My phone had no signal, and the battery was dying quickly. I was exhausted, thirsty, and starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. Just when I was about to give up hope, I heard something. It was faint at first, but as I moved towards it, I recognized Danny's voice. She was calling my name. I started running, following the sound of her voice through the twisting corridors. I burst into a room, and there she was, along with a group of other people from the party. They all looked as relieved to see me as I was to see them. Danny ran up and hugged me, asking where I'd been. Apparently, I'd been missing for hours. As we compared stories, it became clear that something very strange was happening. About half of the partygoers had experienced the same thing I had, getting lost in an ever-changing maze that seemed much larger than the actual club. The other half had no idea what we were talking about. For them, the party had gone on as normal in the original layout of the club. We tried to leave, only to find that the main exit was gone. Where the entrance should have been, there was just another corridor leading deeper into the club. Panic started to set in among the group. People were shouting, crying, demanding explanations. That's when one of the club staff members stepped forward. He was an older guy, with long gray hair and intense eyes. He told us to calm down, that there was an explanation for everything. According to him, the labyrinth wasn't just a club. It was some kind of interdimensional space that expanded and shifted based on the collective energy and emotions of the people inside it. He said that this happened every few years when the conditions were just right. The club would awaken and start generating new rooms and corridors, feeding off the fear and confusion of the people trapped inside. The symbols we'd seen were part of an ancient system designed to navigate and control these shifts, but it had been centuries since anyone knew how to use them properly. I know how crazy this sounds. Believe me, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I would never believe it. But standing there, surrounded by rooms that defied physics and logic, it was hard to deny that something impossible was happening. The staff member told us that the only way to reset the club was to find the central hub and perform a specific ritual. But he warned us that the hub would be constantly moving and that the club would actively try to prevent us from reaching it. We didn't have much choice but to trust him. We split up into groups, each taking a different path and agreeing to meet back in an hour. My group consisted of Danny, two guys named Ben and Aiden, and a girl called Zoe who I'd met earlier that night. The next few hours were like something out of a fever dream. We encountered rooms that defied explanation. A jungle room with real growing plants that tried to entangle us. A room that seemed to be underwater, where we could somehow breathe normally. A room where gravity reversed, and we had to cling to the ceiling. All the while, we were being pursued by something. We never saw it clearly, just glimpses of shadowy figures always just out of sight. Sometimes we'd enter a room to find signs of a struggle, or messages scrawled on the walls warning us to turn back. We lost Ben in a room full of mirrors. One second he was there, the next he was just gone. Zoe had a breakdown in a room where whispers seemed to come from the walls, telling each of us our deepest secrets and fears. We had to practically drag her out. Finally, after what felt like days, but was probably only a few hours, we found the central hub. Other groups were there too, all looking as shell-shocked as we felt. But a lot of people were missing. The staff member who had explained everything was there, looking grim. He told us we had to act fast. The club was reaching a tipping point. If we didn't reset it soon, it would keep expanding indefinitely, trapping us in this nightmare forever. The ritual turned out to be surprisingly simple. We had to stand in a specific pattern and recite a phrase in unison. As we spoke the words, the air around us seemed to thicken. The walls began to pulse with a strange light. I felt a sensation like I was being stretched and compressed at the same time. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, everything snapped back to normal. We were standing in the original layout of the club. The missing people reappeared, looking dazed and confused. The staff member was gone. We all poured out of the club into the early morning light. The street outside was normal, busy with early morning traffic. It was like stepping out of a dream into reality. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. Some people convinced themselves it was all an elaborate prank or a mass hallucination. Others, like me, knew it was real but struggled to come to terms with the implications. The Labyrinth Club was closed down shortly after, cited for multiple code violations. I've driven past it a few times since then. It looks abandoned, but sometimes I swear I can see lights flickering in the windows, hear the faint thump of music coming from deep underground. I don't go to clubs much anymore. The idea of being in a crowded, maze-like space makes me break out in a cold sweat. But more than that, I can't shake the feeling that what we experienced was just the tip of the iceberg, that there are spaces and realities lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to pull us in. So if you're ever at a party and things start to feel a little too strange, a little too dreamlike, get out. Get out before you find yourself lost in a labyrinth of your own making, with no guarantee you'll find your way back out. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.